Please welcome Rebecca Lieb, Analyst, Digital Advertising Media, the Altimeter Group.
Hi, everybody. So as an advertising, marketing, and media analyst who recently, together with my colleague Jeremiah Aoyang, completed a research report on converged media, this mushing together of paid, owned, and earned media, I was very excited to hear about a report that was released just today. I believe you were all emailed a link to it, authored by Marketing Evolution's Rex Briggs. Rex, come out here. And Peyman Nilforoush from Netshelter. So they are going to walk us through an introduction of the research they did. But first, I'd like to just take a very brief audience survey. How many of you worked on the paid side of this equation in advertising? Not so many hands as I expected. What about owned content? Few more hands. And earned, which is social media? That wins. OK, we've established somewhat who our audience is. And with that, I will let you gentlemen take it away and walk us through some slides.
Thanks, Rebecca. How about a round of applause for Brian Solis and Mike Edelhart for throwing such an amazing conference? So I'm actually kind of a late bloomer when it comes to social media. It kind of took me a little bit of time to try to figure out how to make sense of it and how to be effective until our company got featured in a Forbes article. And I basically went on my LinkedIn, I shared it with my followers and on Twitter. And the weeks that followed had people that didn't know about me reaching out to us. And that was probably the first time that I realized, what people say about you, what say about you, or your friends say about you, has a lot to do with clickers. Oh, there you go. How do we go back? Oh, there we go. So. What Jeff Bezos said, which is, what people say about you has a lot to do with what consumers hear and what they trust. And that's really kind of the promise of earned media, and we've always known that. But the question is, on its own, it just reaches a very few number of people, and it's very difficult to scale. But recently, companies like Facebook have done a great job of actually leveraging that trust and credibility of earned media to amplify it in paid advertising. And you see an example of it on the screen when it's a sponsored story, and it's one of your friends that went to Starbucks and bought a cup of coffee, or maybe a bottle of Coke, and hopefully that makes you want a bottle of Coke. On the other side of the equation, which is kind of where we play, when you're trying to buy a car or a computer, maybe you're trying to figure out who should run the country and be our next president. That's where you listen to experts. And we got very kind of curious about this, and we partner up with Marketing Evolution and Rex Briggs to try to figure out, well, what happens if you actually amplified what experts are saying about your brand and use that in your paid advertising? And what would happen to your ROI? Does it matter? Does it not matter? What does it do to your consumers? Rex?
Great. So I just have to say I was fascinated with this question that Peyman had framed up here, because I'd been thinking a lot about what is that nature of that communication and how we perceive advertising. My firm measures marketing return on investment for companies like Coca-Cola. In fact, we did the first social media study for them 5 years ago to really understand how the momentum effect worked, how that sharing and that pass along worked. So it's great to see them 5 years later just continuing to innovate and push that forward. But it left an interesting question because oftentimes it had started off with a paid advertisement or some way of or owned content that you're trying to pass along and share. And what I really saw Peyman doing in his company that fascinated me so much was using the advertising space, or the space that normally had an advertisement in it, and curating expert opinion and thought leadership and putting that in front of other people. And you see this as an example in the ad here, to make it really easy to click on and share, or to get deeper in and read that story. And my question was, does that affect people in a different way? Do they perceive that as being more credible? Are they more likely to change their opinion? Are they more likely to buy that product as a result? How should we think about that space? And should we rethink about what advertising is in total? Should it all be like this as a way of curating expert opinion and content? And so that was really the basis of the research that we did. So to dig deeper, what we did was we created exposed and control groups so we could measure people before their exposure and after their exposure. We could look at that change and the difference. We could see the exposure to the ad, and we could get deeper and look at what happens when they get to the actual page content. We could look at the sharing rate and how that propagates and moves across a community. We could look at it in totality. So in this research, all done in the real world, what we found was that, first of all, people are more likely to like the brand, about a 33% increase over the control group. They're more likely to consider purchasing the product, 58%. More likely to influence others regarding the product and share that and pass that on. And more likely, really across the board, if you, in totality, you can see more likely to really change their opinion and their behavior related to the brand. So when we think about this area, what it demonstrated for us in fairly clear terms was this idea of earned advertising, if you will, which we may talk about what do all these categories mean, and we're constantly looking at different definitions. But if you think about what Peyman's doing, what Empowered is doing with this idea of using the advertising space to take earned content and put that in there from expert opinions, if you think about that as what we're measuring here, it's working better on purchase consideration. It's working better on likely to share than what the standard advertisement would do. So we wanted to look at this further and say, OK, well, what does this actually mean in practicality for a business? And what it means that is if you just to take a round number, if you took 20,000 earned impressions, if you will, that's converting into an increase in brand favorability, increase in purchase intent, an increase in brand advocate. In other words, using advertising in this way, as this earned advertising instead, begins to really fill that purchase pipeline or that funnel. And it's engaging advocates in a way to encourage them to share that information. And that's pretty exciting. For us, as an ROI company, we need to take that a step further and really look at the billions and billions of dollars of media and marketing that we measure and think about where does this fit in and what does this mean for the future. And a key way that we like to look at this is to convert it all down to ROI. So if you look at those dynamics of how this is changing opinion and behavior, and connect it with our data about how that converts to sales, and you can see that this is paying off between 7 and 14 times in terms of a payback from the investment being made. And again, businesses have different profit margins, but by and large, across all these examples we were looking at, that's a profitable investment. So what that does as a firm like ours, which is independent and looking at trying to make recommendations to marketers about how to spend their money, is that we're bullish on this being a way of investing in this environment to make a difference. And so I'll pass it back to you because Peyman at the end of the business has to then figure out what does this mean for businesses and marketers.
And mainly, what it means for consumers is this is all about trust, right? So, the trust in advertising, whether it's like, your friends recommending something or liking something, or in this case, an expert actually, writing a positive review, it's really that trust that the consumer has that ends up driving the ROI. And that was such a key takeaway for us, because for so long we were trying to figure out, well, how do you actually figure out the ROI? And it's like, well, if you tie it back to the trust that you're getting from the consumer, it actually comes together quite nicely. So then the question for us became, well, as marketers, what do we do with this data? And, a lot of the work that we've been trying to do is, well, earned advertising is, potentially part of a greater picture, which is like, the media mix that marketers, use to determine their budget. So, a lot of times today we think about our search budgets and our display budgets, and more increasingly our social budgets. But in fact, I think earned is a bigger umbrella that includes social on the one end, and it also includes the coverage and what the experts are saying about you on the other end. And that was pretty much the key for us. This morning, as Rebecca mentioned, we just released the white paper for earned advertising. This is the first attempt to kind of put an ROI metric to it. We love for you guys to obviously download it, but more importantly, think about what it can do for your brand. And as we think about other brands in various categories, earned advertising could work slightly different in different categories. We would love to have conversations on how we can do this research for your brand. With that, I'll turn it to Rebecca.
I've got a bunch of questions for you guys. Thanks for a great presentation. I'm wondering who's driving here. So we've got earned media, we've got paid media, which is advertising. The constellation I work in, there's owned media as well. What is the progression? Who's the chicken? Who's the egg? And what findings are informing what facets of media, of creative, and of spreading the message? Is it virality? Is it an ad buy?
I'll take a stab at it. But for us, it was like the aha was, look, this is actually not platform specific. In fact, it has very little to do with what social network, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, LinkedIn, or even Google+. It's really related to the trust and credibility that a consumer deems in the person that's actually sharing the information. That's really what's driving it, and that could be your friends in case of Sponsored Story. It could be experts in case of Empowered. And that's just the beginning. It's like, if you think about, what are people saying about you, taking that and making that core to your strategy, it's a far more important, far more influential way to convince people that your brand or product is superior.
Yeah, I mean, as I go back to your core question, I think it's a bit of a red herring to worry as much as we do about that division. And that might be partially because of where I said, I'll jump on a flight tomorrow and sit down with a CMO that spends $500 million in marketing and sit with their COO and CFO to explain why he should get more budget. And that discussion won't come up about the paid versus owned versus earned and what that distinction is. Really, at the end of the day, the person who holds the budget and how they invest that money, they're looking really at an integrated solution about how do they drive their business. And so when we look at the ROI point of view, the question is, well, an integrated program where these things are working together in a symbiotic way is ultimately what the answer is. And I know different people in the audience, as they raise their hand for one or the other, and we get all siloed in terms of how we execute. But you have to remember, at the end of the day, we have to integrate these and bring these together because the consumer's experience is holistic. I saw surround sound in your category, and we talked about surround sound marketing and thinking about like a surround sound stereo system with all these pieces surrounding that consumer sitting in the middle of that process. And we have to remember that it's our job to help integrate those and make them work together synergistically.
Let's explore for a moment the authenticity of the earned. One of the ways that we're seeing paid media get shared, and this is kind of the low-hanging fruit in this category, is a lot of brands are running contests and sweepstakes on Facebook where the simple act of sharing, is not necessarily a product endorsement, it's a bid for a free something. Is that kind of advertising, that kind of earned paid advertising as authentic, as the sharing as meaningful as something that is shared because you're a real brand ambassador? And are consumers really differentiating.
It's bribery, right? I mean, it's, you know, the old Beatles song, "Money Can't Buy Me Love." I mean, try something different. And that's why I was so excited when I saw what Peyman was doing, is because I saw this evolution of, you know, get a $1 off coupon if you become our friend, or do this or do that. And that type of sharing, you know, has some value. It creates that network, but it does not have nearly as much value as when what you are able to share is valuable to the purchase decision. And so when I saw what Netshelter was doing and what Peyman was doing with Empowered, I got really excited, because from a research standpoint, we can only measure the ROI of what marketers are actually doing. And he had created a platform where you really had expert opinion that was curated and being shared in a meaningful way. And I think that marketers take the easy out when they decide to bribe a consumer to become their friend or have something to pass along. And they have to work harder on what's that insight about what's the essence of why somebody would want to share that information, why that would be valuable. So,
you know, thank you. With Facebook and sponsored stories, I think that's becoming evident. I mean, what was the number Zuckerberg shared? It's at $1 million a day. With sponsored stories, something that was launched a year ago, and half of that is in mobile. So those numbers, you know, tells you one thing, and that's where, you know, consumers are paying attention, right? And it's like the trust and credibility of that content is actually driving people to pay attention to it.
And now consumers can even sponsor their own stories.
But, you know, I think you've hit an interesting point, which is that the reason why marketers went to that part was a tail wagging the dog. I mean, if your bonus or you're being rewarded on how many friends have you created or how much share or pass along and so forth, then you end up pursuing a strategy that games the system, that gets you a higher number, but it's not necessarily creating value. And that's why at the end of the day, the metric we were looking at for this business is, how does that convert to sales? Or how does that convert to something that the marketer is really trying to achieve? And so you can actually clean up, if you're looking at this problem inside your company, you can clean up a lot of that by making sure that you're defining what truly are we trying to achieve with this marketing campaign, and measuring that, rather than these intermediary numbers and metrics that really don't have nearly as much meaning and can be gamed pretty easily.
So Rex, that's an interesting point, because you're talking about aligning everybody around goals, which in a perfect world sounds like what you'd want to do, right? But on the other hand, we've got the paid people and we've got the earned people. They're not necessarily at the same agency. They're not necessarily in the same wing of the building. How do you get these workflow systems to play nice together when you're really talking about marketing across several different departments, several different disciplines, different vendors, different service providers who, you know, can we say it, are competitors? They're all looking for more budget next year than the next guy has.
Yeah, and the adult supervision is the marketer really truly getting engaged in this area. There really should be a lot more marketers at this conference here learning about these things and recognizing it's that their ownership and their responsibility to be actively involved. That this is not something that you can delegate to your agency. Yes, you should have an agency. That agency should be a partner with you, but a partner rather than a being an absentee landlord, which is what we have with a lot of marketers today. So the first one is getting marketers directly involved in that part so that they can help and answer that question. What happens when it gets delegated down is that oftentimes, as it fragments to different agencies, they lose sight of what the marketer goal is. Now, the marketer hasn't lost sight of the goal. At the end of the day, they will keep you or fire you based upon whether you achieved it, and you might not even know what you're trying to achieve. And so really trying to make sure, if you're in that position of receiving a brief, trying to trace back and say, really, what's the big picture of what the marketer is trying to achieve here is important. I think some of the training programs that you're doing, I'm excited about the areas that you're going and the papers that you're writing, because I think you're helping to get people to see it as more connected. And then what we're seeing, the final one, is we're seeing a lot more, I mean, what we're working on as a firm at Marketing Evolution is budget planning software and tools to really put everything together so that you, when it does break apart, you can roll it back up together and see how do these pieces play together? How are they meant to work synergistically and interact? And that's a bigger headache than I thought it was going to be. It's really hard to do, but it can be done and needs to be done. Otherwise, we're going to just continue to have these different wings fighting against one another and not achieving marketing success.
I was fascinated by the report that you guys did on Converge Media. I I mean, I thought for the first time somebody actually took a stab at, look, if you want to actually leverage this for your brand to win, you actually have to work together, right? So, and that's a hard thing to say to a Fortune 500 company that's been siloed for all this time. And now all of a sudden, the PR people and the social people and the paid people would have to sit at the same table, figure out, in a strategy, and they all have different KPIs. So if you're measured on a different KPI and you're asked to come together, it's kind of like, Charlene Lee yesterday talked about, what does it take to actually break through and, get people over the edge. And, it's the same thing. It's like if you want them to actually do something, you're going to have to change your KPIs, right? You can't have a click-through KPI if you're trying to get, the paid people to play with the earned people, right, who work on an engagement or an influence metric. And that is so core. If we are ever going to make a significant change, which will have brands at the end of the day winning, it's going to have to be through changing KPIs and focusing on what really matters for the brand and where they're connecting with the consumer.
Appreciate the kind words on our research. One of the reasons that we recommend getting your arms around this now is that we see this convergence of paid and earned and also owned bleeding into traditional. We're seeing tweets on billboards in Times Square and Giant Stadium and Facebook likes on TV shows. Do you see that trend, and how, if you do agree with me, how will this affect the ecosystem when traditional becomes part of this equation, not just digital?
Yeah, I mean, really, the recent book that I wrote, Surf's Up, was really trying to reconcile the evolution of marketing accountability and ROI measurement with the changing landscape where you were no longer measuring traditional advertising, you're measuring these integrated social programs. And so the first half of the book really talks about the evolution in social media and kind of the importance of content. And you wrote a great book about content as well and the importance of that area as well. And then the second half of it actually talks almost exclusively about technology and the algorithms to figure out ROI. And so it starts off, if a marketer knows what their end objective and goal is, then how do you then take these intermediary metrics like click-throughs or sharing and so forth and have those still ladder up to that end objective and goal and manage this integrated campaign? And I just don't see how it happens without software playing a really important role. Software to help in the marketing ROI planning phase, software then to help track what's working, what's not in the dashboards and feeding back, and then software optimizing and making mid-course adjustments and giving a signal back to the marketer when they need what's working, what's not, so they can have the insights to think about how to make the next campaign more effective. And maybe even the word campaign isn't the right word. The next cycle, because that cycle is going to become continuous, sort of like the shift from the news cycle becoming continuous when cable came along and changed it from the morning planning meeting for the evening news. Now it's continuous, and so you have to have different technology that supports that. I think we're going through that same type of change as brands go from this campaign mentality to a 24/7 continuous cycle.
So we're moving into real time or near real time with this?
Yeah, and what's interesting about the software with that real time is that you still then have to be able to break down what's going on in the stream of real time into a workflow that allows you to plan and execute against your brand ideal and your brand strategy. And so I think this is going to be a pretty exciting time to be in marketing, because you really have this blend of the insight-driven art side of it meeting up with the software and the algorithms and the math part of it to come together to produce something much more powerful. They have to live together, I think, in this future.
How many fans of the show Mad Men?
Boy, it was easier then.
So, that's been advertising for many, many years, right? A bunch of people getting into a room, figuring out, what is the most creative way to tell a story. And now it's like completely changed. It's like in real time, to your point, you can understand what message actually resonates with your consumer. And so you don't need to get into a room and try to figure that out. You can actually put your message out there and figure out what's actually resonating. And that is, really turning, marketing and advertising on its head. And so it's like the notion that when you earn that trust, and you amplify that through your advertising, well, that has a higher credibility. So like, changing your strategy and changing the way you even start, that development is so core to what marketers are like trying to do right now. But, again, going back to your point, it all starts with them coming together. So different parts of the equation of paid, owned, and earned coming together to actually produce the best result for the consumer.
But I think that brings it full circle, though, because if you think about this 24/7 cycle, the ability to listen and curate the content and information that's happening, especially the expert opinions like what you guys are doing, and to bring that into the space that's normally been thought of as advertising. I mean, let's just think of advertising as just a container. We can put whatever message we want in there, and to put the voice of an expert or the customer themselves in that container. That, I think, allows us I mean, the technologies that you guys are bringing to bear allows that cycle to happen in a way that's much more authentic. And I think that your model becomes an early model for other brands to be thinking about, which is how do we begin, as you said, the billboards that become tweets. And these are the early signals. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed, as one futurist said. It is here, and these are the examples, and marketers need to learn from these.
Last question, yes or no. Do consumers differentiate between paid, owned, and earned media, or is it all just media?
They do differentiate. I was hanging out with the trumpeter from Train last week down at the A&A marketing thing, and after a few drinks, he started telling me how much he hated advertising and everything that we stood for. And he poured me another tequila and then showed me on his phone this skywriting of an airplane putting insurance thing invading his skyline. So I think that what he does differentiate advertising, and people like him differentiate advertising as something that they kind of pull back from and they put up a protective wall from. I think that's why I was excited to measure what Peyman and team were doing, because I think that is much more authentic, and that's perceived as content and valuable. And so I do think that there is a line, and the more we move towards capturing the expert opinion and the voice and content or other customers, the better off we are.
Rex, Peyman, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for having us.